Hello and welcome back to Podcast with a K. I'm your host Carla with a K, and we are back for another fine podcast evening, whatever it is you're listening to, whether it is WECS 90.1 FM, twitch.tv/CarlyGirl with 2 eyes, of course, or Spotify, YouTube, or whatever your preferred listening platform may be. I am joined by one of the most exciting guests we've had, not just because she's one of my very own personal best friends, but it's the first time we've had, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but I think it's the first time we've had a real live actual doctor in the house. Anybody a doctor? Yes. And it's Jazmine. You just listened to her song choice, Emergence by Sleep Tokens. That's a quick little glimpse into who she is, but I'll let her introduce herself. Jazmine, take it away.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. My name is Dr. Jazmine Eccles-Miller, and I am a toxicologist by trade and training, but I recently started a new job as a postdoctoral research scientist, which basically just means I have a PhD and I do research in someone else's lab. And that research is now heading towards human nutrition. So I study iron and folate, which is a B vitamin supplementation and deficiency.
That is super impressive, obviously. Congratulations on your being a doctor. Let's start there. But, you know, for anyone who doesn't know, I guess, what would lead somebody down this track, because I have asked you about this endlessly. For context, Jazmine and I met in high school, and we became friends in chemistry class. And whereas I felt myself start to deviate away from that track, Jazmine took a liking to all of the things that I personally hated, and so I was like, why are you doing this? Why do you like this? Please tell me everything. So, for the dear listeners at home, what led you down this path?
Yeah, so from the time I was able to talk, I wanted to be a doctor, and I had always meant it as being a medical doctor, but I was in undergrad and was getting ready to graduate and wasn't really sure that med school was right for me. So I took a gap year, which was planned anyways. And then following that gap year, I applied to graduate school at Clemson University, and I was accepted there for a master's degree, and I finished that. But during that master's degree, I found a really true love for teaching and for research, but benchtop research, behind the scenes. So I do a lot of work with cell culture, so just cells in a dish, but I also work with mice, so that's called an in vivo model. And while I was doing that during my master's, I decided I would like to stay and be a doctor, but a PhD rather than an MD. So I had to reapply to Clemson, unfortunately, but I was accepted because I was already in my PI's lab.
Because you're goated.
Right. And he asked me to stay. He was like, "Are you sure you want to leave?" And I was like, "Actually, I don't." So I stayed. And one of the things that actually led me to not teaching full time, because the plan was to become a lecturer, I had a member of my PhD committee, which is the group of people that either tell me that my research is good enough to give me a PhD, or they tell me that it's not. Um, so one of those committee members told my advisor that I was basically, synopsis, I was too good to just teach. And that really sat with me. So I considered it. I did 3.5 years to finish the PhD. And as I was getting ready to finish up, that same committee member actually was looking to hire a postdoc research scientist and reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in joining her lab. So I did, and now I'm on the trajectory to join academia as a research faculty member.
It lined up kind of beautifully for you.
It really did. Honestly, everything worked out exactly the way it needed to. I was not meant to be a medical doctor. I was definitely meant to not speak to people as much as possible.
Unless you're standing, a good 10 feet away at a whiteboard.
At a podium.
At a podium, yes.
Give me the podium and I'll speak.
Exactly. So a different kind of track of questioning for you. What exactly does it look like whenever you first take that leap into a lab rather than, in a classroom? I feel like there's obviously a different weight that comes with, this is in theory what I've learned versus this is an actual application that's going to change somebody's life at some point.
Yeah, so one of the things that's really interesting, particularly about doing a PhD, is during your undergrad degree or during your master's degree, what you're being asked to do is you're being asked to absorb information that already exists. And so when you're being taught in college about a certain topic, you're only learning the things that have already been investigated. We've already tested those things rigorously, and we're presenting them to you almost as facts. Whereas a PhD, you are synthesizing new factual information. And so one of the things that's really important to be able to do as a PhD or as a scientist in general is to be able to form new hypotheses that test something that there's a gap in that research area. And so that is the primary difference that I found between being a student in a classroom and being a researcher. You have to be able to identify where a gap in knowledge exists and then come up with some sort of project that would test that idea to support whatever you think the answer to that gap is. So it is very much a heavy test of your critical thinking skills, but also your ability to create these different project pieces, these different, say we're working with cells, what cell assay is going to give me this particular answer that I'm looking for? And is that going to give me the whole answer, or do I need to pair it with something else? So it's a lot more critical thinking. It's a lot more being able to come up with ideas and answers on the fly, but also being able to speculate a little bit and
Mhm.
say, okay, here's what I think is happening, and then come up with a way to test that. So it is very different.
Do you get to choose what you research in a lab, or is it more so like this is kind of what your mentor was doing and you follow in those footsteps?
So, as a master's student, generally you're being told what exactly to research. So, when I first started, I was given a project that was already sort of created for me, and I was just kind of following directions. As a PhD student, you are usually doing three different projects or three different pieces of the same project. The first project, the way that my advisor sort of approached it was the first project is something that he gives you. The second project is something that you all come up with together. And the third project is yours and yours alone. And so that's sort of dependent on advisor. You get a lot of people who end up doing maybe one or two pieces of their project that they synthesize from scratch. Maybe it's something you're interested in, but usually the overarching theme of your projects is what your advisor is working on. So I joined a lab that was working on, at the time, fatty acid metabolism. And that was one of the things that drew me to the lab was the relationship to fatty acid metabolism and obesity, diabetes, and those types of human diseases. And then he moved into this toxicology based project set that he was receiving funding for. And so it sort of morphed. But both of my pieces of my project that I was involved in synthesizing myself primarily lied in that toxicology range.
It is super interesting. Whenever Jasmine first started studying these things, we would meet up and catch up on each other's lives, and I'd ask her, like, so what have you been working on? Made any crazy discoveries? And she's like, actually, yeah, but I don't really know how to explain it. And I was like, explain it like if I'm somebody in your lab. Explain it like I'm like one of your brand new students or someone that's working alongside you. And she did, and it was super complex, but I'm glad I did it because soon after, things started showing up on the news that Jasmine was actively studying. Jazmine is indeed a published author, which is very cool. And it's her research that the news has been reporting on, particularly in regards to PFAS. So walk us down, a little synopsis of what it is that you helped discover.
Yeah, so PFAS, if you aren't familiar with what they are, Carla was saying they are in the news. They're really popular right now, especially because the current administration is rolling back regulations to limit
Mm.
our exposure to them. Not great. So PFAS are a group of, they're called fluorosurfactants, and that's just a fancy word for they are fluorinated. So they have a lot of fluorines on them, and they are generally used to create either something like a nonstick coating. They're really popular for fireproofing things. So they're found in aqueous firefighting foams that firefighters use to put out fires. So in a fire extinguisher, for example, they're also used or were previously used as coatings for furniture, stains in furniture, things like that. Um, but there are thousands of different PFASs, and the PFAS that I studied is called PFOS, or perfluorooctane sulfonic acid is the very fancy long name for it. And it is referred to as a legacy PFAS. So this is one of the PFASs that was first developed, and it was used in a lot of different things. But one of the problems with PFAS in general is when they get into the environment, because they have a lot of fluorines on the outside of them, it makes them really resistant to degradation. And so they tend to accumulate in our environment, and particularly in our water and soil. And so a lot of times humans and animals as well are being exposed to PFAS through these different, consumption routes. So you're drinking contaminated water. And that's why it's really important to have, sort of a side tangent, but it's
Yeah.
really important to have regulations in place that help to limit our exposure, because exposure to these chemicals is net negative.
Right.
Um, it's not good for you. We know there are a lot of diseases that are associated with them. Um, but PFOS is, like I said, a legacy PFAS. It is or has been phased out of production and use in the majority of countries. I think China actually just recently banned PFOS.
Hmm.
Um, 2 years ago, I believe, but it's been banned in the United States and the UK for a really long time. And the reason for that is because there are so many negative health outcomes associated with it. And
Right.
a lot of the research primarily focuses on the liver, because the liver is the primary site in your body for detoxification. So the liver is responsible for breaking down these toxins and eliminating them. But my personal interest lies in a different tissue entirely, and that would be skeletal muscle. And so some of the research that I helped develop and sort of probe into that had not been done before in toxicology is researching what PFOS does to skeletal muscle tissue. And so my recent publication that just came out in February, actually, is the official date of publication, investigates the differences between what the liver's response to PFOS exposure is versus skeletal muscles exposure. And what we found is these two tissues that are both very metabolically active. They perform a lot of metabolism in your body, but even though they're both metabolically highly active, they respond very differently to PFOS. And so PFOS seems to cause skeletal muscle wasting. And we know skeletal muscle health is really important for preventing things like insulin resistance that can lead to diabetes, or uptake of nutrients to metabolize them to prevent obesity. And so with the negative effects of PFOS being really strong on skeletal muscle compared to what we previously thought, that gives us a new route to investigate these potential effects and hopefully help to reinstate some of those preventative measures to make sure that we're not being exposed to chemicals that can really harm our metabolic health overall.
And it's interesting because there's also kind of a regional predisposition to a lot of these diseases. And it's been in recent talks in the news and in your research that, like you said, this chemical was kind of being leached from the things that were used, whether it was nonstick coating for pans or for furniture. And in the southeast region of the US, of course, a primary source of income for the last few decades, if not more, had been the furniture industry, right? High Point, North Carolina is the furniture capital of the world. And, a lot of the people that we know because we grew up in that area of North Carolina, I don't know how much y'all in other parts of the US in this region have noticed it, but a lot of people are predisposed to obesity and to diabetes and to things even as simple as liver disease and liver damage. And it'll be people who, they walk 5 miles every day and they eat broccoli for every meal, like whatever the case may be. Like, it's people who do live healthy lives, but there's not necessarily anything you can do about it, because if it's in the water, it's in the water, and that's kind of it.
Right, and that's part of the problem is a lot of public health, its focus is supposed to be on broader populations. And so you can take charge of your personal health by, like you said, eating healthy, eating broccoli, like get your fiber in, all those good things that we like to do to keep us personally healthy. But public health heavily relies on government intervention to ensure that we are not potentially being exposed to something that people are not responsible for. It's larger corporations. And so, like you were saying, some of the regional distribution of these exposures varies significantly based on what is manufactured in your area. For example, High Point, Thomasville area, heavily, reliant on that furniture manufacturing. Raleigh, North Carolina is what is considered a Superfund site. It's NC State because they manufacture textiles, and textiles also use these chemicals. And so Superfund sites are actually heavily funded to investigate how these chemicals are being leached into the water and how we can clean them up. Because you can use things like activated charcoal to remove PFAS from water, but on a broader scale, how are you doing that in a lake? How are you doing that in a river? How are you doing that in soil that's already been contaminated and now your population is exposed? And like you said, the rise of obesity and diabetes. I think the WHO estimates something like, I think it's around the 50% mark of Americans are obese. And so who's to say that that's not, reliant on these chemical exposures rather than just quote unquote an unhealthy lifestyle? We've also seen a rise in endocrine diseases like PCOS, for example. Who's to say that these exposures to not just PFASs, but all sorts of chemicals that are being bleached by these companies, who's to say that isn't partially responsible?
And they're also forever chemicals, right? Like there's nothing you can do after the fact.
Right. So PFAS specifically has a half-life, which means after a certain period of time, half of it is eliminated. It has a half-life of about 5.5 years. So if you say you take in a bunch of PFAS and you're eliminating it, you're only eliminating half increments every 5.5 years. Mm-hmm. And that's wreaking havoc on your body. If you're exposed to particularly really high amounts to it, like people who are in furniture manufacturing or something, industrial, you're going to be exposed to these really high amounts. Firefighters are particularly at risk for these really high exposures. And we see that a lot of firefighters have cardiovascular issues. A lot of them die of heart attacks quite early. Yeah. And so it's kind of crazy to think about the possible contribution of these different chemicals to their health risks. So yeah, it's pretty crazy the difference just regionally what you can be exposed to. And like you said, I'm not sure in terms of other areas, but I know the Southeast, particularly North and South Carolina, have several sites that we see really high PFAS exposure in people.
And it's one of those things where it's like we couldn't have known because it was a new thing. And unfortunately, no one had the thought like, this is probably going to be bad for everybody. I mean, now, of course, we're a lot more mindful about what we let into our water system. But, you've had also, I think, the pushback of people who are like, oh, but that's what they said before they put fluoride in the water. Like, there's people who have a lot to say about a lot of things without understanding, I guess, the severity of, chemical pollutants, right? Like it's not something that can be cleaned by purifying your water. There's no amount of filters that could.
Right. And there are filters that do filter out PFASs. They're quite expensive and to implement them on a broad scale. So for like a water system treatment plant for a city it's cost prohibitive. Like there's no way to do that on a grand scale. So then it becomes your own personal responsibility to pay for these very expensive filters, which of course heavily affects, these different populations that are disenfranchised. And so I think that is, another issue that comes with public health. We should be investing into these wastewater treatment system plants because it is beneficial for the broader population. But unfortunately, the government doesn't necessarily see it that way. And some of our citizens don't see it that way. They do see it as sort of this personal responsibility, but it's not your personal choice to be exposed to this. This is something that companies are exposing you to.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too that's like, it's not my problem until it is, right? Like you can have the filters you want in your house, but what about when you go out to a restaurant? What about when you go visit some family in another place that doesn't have these filters? Like, it'll eventually catch up to you. And we just gotta, I guess, keep an eye on what that's gonna do, because like at that point your only real solution is, like you said, this is the hand that you were dealt. So now how can you take accountability for your current health situation, I guess?
Right. And something else that you were mentioning earlier about, we didn't know about these issues with these chemicals, and that's why they weren't regulated. So something that I think the UK does a little bit better than us, we in the US regulate our chemicals very differently than in the UK. So in the UK, you basically have to prove that something is safe for it to be used on the market. Because we live in a worse capitalist society, the United States allows things to go on the market and to be used before they've gone through any rigorous testing. And so we test for toxicity after it's been used, whereas like the UK, so in the EU, they test for toxicity prior to allowing things to enter the market. And so I think a lot of that could, if we adopted something more similar to that method, would have helped protect a lot of people from these potentially harmful chemicals. But that's an aside that I thought I would mention, that regulations are very different in different countries, and the US doesn't do a good job already of regulating these chemicals.
That is interesting to think about, though. Like, it's the innocent until proven guilty mentality, right? Like, there's you have to prove that something is bad for you before anything is done
Before
about
you
it. But
take
at
it
that
off the
point,
market.
yeah, it's too late.
Right, you've already been exposed to it. And things that are replacing these legacy PFASs, so something that replaced PFOS is called Gen X. Gen X actually ended up being more acutely toxic than PFOS
Oh,
was.
great. Love
And
that.
so they replaced it, but it's worse for you. So yeah, it
We
doesn't make a
can't
whole lot of
win.
sense. No. So yeah, they come up with all these replacements, but then they don't test them and they just use them. And then it's like, oh, this is actually worse.
Yeah. If only we had, common sense and rational thinking in our leadership.
One could only wish.
One could only hope.
Only hope.
So that's a little bit on who Jazmine is and what she studies and what she does, but she also does other cool things. She does, in fact, kind of mirror this interest across her entire life. We'll get more into that, however, after this song break. So, Jazmine, this title is in Japanese, which I do not read. What are we listening to next?
So the title in English is called Where Our Blue Is, something like that. It is the opening theme song to season 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen. And the
JJK
song
fans
is
in the chat, rise up!
Where are my JJK fans? Basically, the song is about saying goodbye to your childhood or a childhood friend and sort of coming to terms with, the sadness that happens when you say goodbye to these fond childhood memories.
All right, well, without further ado, let's give that a listen, shall we? We spent the first half learning about who she is, what she does, what she studies, and, the global impact of what she's discovering recently within the world of PFAS, which you've probably heard on the news. If you haven't, look it up. That's PFAS, as it sounds. But in what Jazmine studies is the effect that this has on skeletal muscle. However, I have an interest in a different set of muscles because Jazmine is also a bodybuilder. That's right, segues are back, baby. Jazmine, how did you fall into bodybuilding? Let's discuss.
Oh, that's a crazy question. So I was a COVID come out, go to the gym after COVID hit. I had gained a lot of weight and I was not happy with what I looked like. And so I just started kind of casually going to the gym. My husband helped get me into the gym. But then I found a TikTok page of actually my current coach in 2021, I believe. And she is a competitive bodybuilder and she was going through her first prep. And I was like, this is so cool. I've never seen this. I didn't even know women did this. So I was like following along and I just fell in love with the concept of sculpting a physique that is completely individual and completely your own, but also sculpting it to match a certain criteria, I think is really interesting. So I started lifting to become a bodybuilder in probably 2022, and I hired that same person as my coach just this past September. And so we are hopefully getting ready to prep for a show either the end of this year or early next year, and that will be my debut as a bikini bodybuilder.
How exciting! So,
I'm stoked.
in your journey in doing bodybuilding, you've learned a lot, I think. You've always been active. Like the entire time I've known you, you've always done dance, you've done horseback riding. You personally just like to work out and lift and get swole. But ever
Oh yeah.
since taking this seriously, especially with your coach, I feel like you learned a lot of kind of specific stuff that we see a lot. Like we've seen, I think, all the same memes, right? Our For You pages, right? You see a meme, you see politics, you see somebody going crazy in the gym, and then whatever tailored interest you yourself have. And with that, I think we've discussed, of course, comes a lot of questionable advice because it worked for one person and then they promote it as, you know, something that might work for everybody, which is, as we discussed in the first half, so very rarely the case because everyone, you know, is still an individual despite these factors. And something that I know that we talked a lot about specifically was detox diets.
Oh my God. I
So
hate
let's
a
start our
detox
myth
diet.
busting there.
I hate the word detox. You do not need to detox your liver. You do not need to detox your kidneys. There's no such thing. And all they're selling you is some expensive juice or whatever that's just going to make you poop a
It's a
lot.
laxative.
It's a laxative.
Skinny
That's
tea
why
is
you
a
lose
laxative.
weight. No, skinny tea, it makes you skinny, but not because you lose weight. It's because you literally just don't have anything in your intestines anymore.
It's the water weight. I actually
No,
thought
for
about you
real.
at work the other day. We were discussing, you know, this one dude had been here and there and everywhere. And he was like, you know, like the lifestyle's crazy, but man, I feel like I look great. You know, I lost 10 pounds. And in my head, I was like, that's water weight. The other guy working with us goes, isn't that water weight? And I'm like, I didn't even have to say it. I didn't even have to say it.
Lay.
The other guy,
Rocket
though,
King.
genuinely straight up asked, what do you mean water weight? What's water weight? Like wet water. And we all look at each other like, oh, not common knowledge. What?
Oh, okay.
So why do crash diets not work?
Yeah, so one of the things with crash diets or any fad diet that you see, I'm talking about you, keto. So a lot of the fad diets, what they do is restrict one particular macronutrient. So first, defining what a macronutrient is. Macronutrients are large molecules that you need to consume. So it's going to be things like proteins, lipids, which are fats, and carbohydrates, which are, sugars or, grains and things like that. And so when you do a lot of these crash diets or fad diets, you're generally limiting either fats, your lipids, or your carbohydrates. But a lot of times they're very calorically restricted too. So say that there's a person, me for example, my maintenance calories, which is the amount of calories that I need to eat to stay the same weight, is about 2,500 calories. Okay. To lose weight, what a lot of people do is they just immediately slash calories by eliminating a bunch of fats and a bunch of carbs. And then you drop down and say, I'm eating 1,500 calories. Are you going to lose that weight? Yes. However, that diet is not sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, that means you cannot sustain that weight loss long term, and you're highly likely to gain that weight back. And so that's why a lot of fad diets or crash diets don't work, is because you're not making a full-blown lifestyle change, because you cannot live on 1,500 calories for the rest of your life. It's extremely unhealthy, and you're just going to be hungry all the time. And then that's going to lead to things like binging. And so
And even if
that's
you have the
why,
willpower, the health complications that arise from being malnourished exist as well.
oh my gosh, yes, malnourishment, especially for women when you lose your cycle, that's extremely unhealthy. Your hormones, when you eliminate too many fats from your diet, you can't synthesize hormones. And that doesn't just mean testosterone and estrogen. That means things like your hunger signals, like leptin. You can't synthesize those things. And now your body is completely unbalanced and out of control because you don't have the right signaling happening. And
Mm,
so, yeah, any of the crash diets or fad diets that are popular things like keto or the carnivore diet, they usually eliminate one particular macronutrient, that macro being carbs.
right.
People just, carbs have been fear mongered since we were kids, I remember girls in my dance classes going on these no carb diets. And they were like, I can't even eat an apple because it's carbs. And like, y'all
Yes.
are insane. Where are you getting your fiber? Because fiber is a carb. And
I
so,
yeah, man.
yeah,
No, I was just gonna
it
say I
sounds
had a similar
insane.
conversation there, which I told you about recently about cutting out carbs and just making it be a lifestyle change. But
Hmm.
we were talking about this. A lot of things develop into a carb.
Yes. So part of the problem with fad diets and the elimination of one macro is that your body has a workaround to make that. So the only thing that it doesn't make are things like essential amino acids. So there are a group of 7 amino acids that are considered essential, which means you have to eat them. Things like polyunsaturated fats, or you can think of them as fish oils. Those are also essential because your body cannot make them. But your body has a workaround for the most part to make the thing that it wants. So if your body wants a carb, it's going to make it. And it's going to make it from something you already have. Generally speaking, you're going to make it from an amino acid, which is the building block of a protein. So you could be eating proteins, but you're converting those into carbs anyways. So I think that's something that the general population does not know because I took an advanced human nutrition course as part of my grad school coursework. And that is where I learned a lot of these different interconversions because your body prefers to use carbs as an energy source. So if it can take a protein and basically turn it into a carb, it's going to do it because that's the easiest way to make energy.
Which is why
So,
eventually people plateau on diets anyway.
right. Well, and another thing with plateaus are your body will metabolically adapt to what you're feeding it. So a calorie deficit is the way that you lose weight, which, like I said earlier, it's just basically um, not eating your maintenance. It's eating underneath of what your body needs to maintain itself. But eventually, your calorie maintenance when you lose weight drops. And so, say I weighed 200 pounds and my maintenance was 300 or 3,000 calories. When I lose 50 pounds, my maintenance is not 3,000 calories anymore. It's closer to 2,500 calories. And so these people are dropping and slashing their calories. Your body metabolically adapts to that low caloric intake and it has nowhere to move from there. So the next thing to do is slash your calories more. But if you're already eating 1,500 calories, where are you going to go from there?
Right.
You're going to starve yourself. And your body is going to start eating up the proteins in your muscles to make carbs because it needs carbs. Like there's no workaround for needing carbs. It's going to, take all of that protein that you consumed and be like, yeah, I'm not going to use this to make your muscles bigger. I'm actually just going to make it into glucose to feed your
And
brain.
immediately burn it
So,
off, yeah.
right. So you're eating these high protein diets, but you're not utilizing those proteins as proteins, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And there's also, I think, a different mindset there because we've talked about like, okay, well, if dieting doesn't work, then working out is gonna be what does the trick. But even then, you also have different, I guess, effects. Like you were saying, right? The cool thing about bodybuilding is you actually get to use your workouts to a specific end that you can see, right? It's not just you're building strength. It's not like, for just general mobility. And I've asked you before, like the difference between doing a low intensity but very long workout versus one of those like quick burst, like super heavy, super fast type of workouts. And even those have different, I guess, purposes, different effects. And also, neither of the two have particularly that large of an effect on the caloric deficit needed to change weight, right? I think you were saying
Correct.
it's only like 10% or something of what you do.
It's a really low percentage. And so the concept behind working out to burn calories or burn off the food that you're eating or whatever is really flawed because exercise, while it does increase there's a lot of complicated words, your total daily energy expenditure or TDEE. So that's the amount of calories that you're burning. So say you take a sedentary person who sits all day for work and they don't work out a lot. Their TDEE caloric intake should maybe be 2,000 calories. You add in some light exercise, it goes up by maybe 100 calories, which is 25 carb. It's not a lot. And so there's this misunderstanding that exercise is how you're burning a lot of calories. It does burn some, but it is not a substantial amount to be really beneficial for the general population. And I think that's qualifying it. So when I'm talking about this information, I'm talking about it from the general population standpoint. Bodybuilders are psychotic and they'll do 2 hours on the Stairmaster and a 2 hour lift. And yeah, that does increase
It
caloric
becomes your
burn a lot.
entire lifestyle.
Right. And so the majority of the population can't do that. But if you can incorporate movement in the form of any exercise, of course, that is extremely healthy for you, but it is not the method to burn calories. A lot of the weight loss, if we're generalizing weight loss, is done with like moderating food and not exercise. But I do recommend exercise.
Yeah,
Just as a
the balance
general
of both
rule
is
of thumb.
definitely ideal.
But yeah, you're only gonna burn so many calories. And a lot of these, the Apple Watch or Fitbits or whatever that track your calorie burn during your workout, they're extremely inaccurate. There's actually a study that was done comparing, it was like 7 or 8 different fitness trackers, and they're all wrong. They're all completely inaccurate. So
Is it
that's a
true that they all
really
kind of just go on a average value multiplied by the time spent in movement, so it just kind of calculates like, oh, elevated heartbeat, elevated movement, multiply, oh, you burnt 100 calories right now.
right. And that's part of the problem is it does monitor your heart rate, so it does have a general idea of sort of like the activity that you're doing. So Apple Watch, I know that's what I wear, can pick up what exercise you're doing, and then it uses that pre-formulated sort of integration with your heart rate to figure out how many calories that you burned. But you didn't really burn that many calories. It's usually a gross overestimation. And so it says, oh, on the Stairmaster today, I burned 300 calories, when really I probably only burned 100. Who
Right.
knows? But that's one of the reasons why a lot of the recommendations are not to exercise as your primary form of increasing your caloric deficit. It
Right.
can help, but it's not the end all be all.
There's
So
no
if you
point of
can't
burning
go to
yourself
the
out on the treadmill.
right. I used to not do any cardio at all, and I still was able to lose weight. You don't catch me. I used to be a Stairmaster hater. I love her now. She's my bestie, but like you would not catch me doing any form of cardio, and I was still able to lose a substantial amount of weight, even with just weightlifting itself. So I think, yeah, the general population would really benefit from realizing that you don't have to do hours and hours of cardiovascular exercise to lose weight.
Right. And it's also not about, eating half a grapefruit and a cube of cheese when you're about to pass out, a la Devil Wears Prada. It's like sustained changes
Yeah,
over
no.
time. I mean, like you
Right. And
said,
I
your
think
journey's
that,
been, what, 4 years?
yeah, it's been 4 going on 5 years, and I've lost in that time period about 50 pounds. So, yeah, I mean, it's a lifestyle change, and I think that's the difficult thing is a lot of people, I come from the privilege of being able to do that lifestyle change. It's hard. And I can't imagine, oh my God, if I had kids, if I had other responsibilities, if I didn't work in academia and I had a very rigid 9 to 5. I do know some nurses who bodybuild. Um, I met a couple girls on a retreat recently that have very demanding jobs. I mean, 12-hour shifts, and they do it, but it's extremely difficult. So I can't imagine factoring in, kids and other responsibilities that really put a strain on your ability. And I hate those fitness influencers that are in their early 20s and they're like, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. We don't. We don't. Some people work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. We do not all have the same 24 hours.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And
But it is a
yeah, only a certain part of it is your choices, is what all I was gonna say.
right. Yep. And, if you prioritize that, that's great. But little lifestyle changes are really important too. I mean, so I track every gram of food that goes into my body. Not this past week, it's been a little stressful week, but for the most part, I track all of my food. So, the general population say a serving of peanut butter or almond butter. I like almond butter. So a serving of almond butter is 32 grams or 2 tablespoons. If you asked a normal person to estimate what that serving looks like visually, they cannot do it. They are extremely inaccurate. And so a lot of it has to do with the fact that in the US at least, we have a weird skewed idea of what serving sizes look like. And we don't teach this information when people are old enough to really understand and digest it. We have health classes in elementary and middle school, but we should really be teaching some form of nutrition course in high school because these students are about to go off to college and the whole freshman 15 is a real thing because you're stressed, but also you tend to overeat
Because you don't
when
know
you
what
don't
a
realize.
normal amount of food looks like.
Right. And so you're sitting, and maybe you were a student athlete in high school and you stopped working out and
Yeah.
you stopped being an athlete, and now you're eating like you used to, and you're not burning those calories because student athletes burn a
I
lot of
was gonna actually
calories.
make that exact point. You have a lot of student athletes who take it upon themselves to, you know, especially in sports that have like a weight class like wrestling or that like
Yes.
size you up like football, where, you know, you need to look a certain way, you need to fit a certain way, you need to measure a certain way. So, you know, you have kids who drink 150 bottle of Tampico orange juice and that's it for the day, you know, or who like
Right.
go and sweat in their car so that they can lose the 2 pounds
Hmm.
that they need to make a certain like number. And then, like you
Right.
said, you know, you go from that to college, you're no longer doing that. Now your concept of like your metabolism is shot, your concept of any sort of
Right.
portion control is non-existent, and on top of that, like you said, a lot of kids, most kids, you also have mandatory physical activity classes as a kid, right?
Right.
Like you take all of that away and that's what causes that freshman 15. So some people either lose an insane amount of weight or put on an insane amount of weight, and then, you know, it's the rest of your life to work against the habits that you created in your later formative years.
Right. And one of the things that I also think about too, especially for young women, the joke about the almond mom. How many of us have moms that eat like a bird, like don't eat almost anything?
Nitpick
And
here
I
and there.
know, right, I know of a couple of girls whose moms were very much like that, and they would make negative comments about how much they would eat. And so they would hide food and hide it in their rooms and eat it. So, I think the relationships around food is really different generationally as well. That we as women, particularly, learn diet culture really young. And so, if we could give students, particularly high school students, a route to learn what healthy eating really looks like, I believe the estimation is something like 90% of Americans do not hit their daily fiber intake goal. It's 28 grams, and almost no one hits it.
It doesn't sound
Why?
like a lot either.
No, it's really not. I mean, you eat a serving or a little cup of raspberries, and that's 5 grams of fiber right there.
Love
Like you can
raspberries.
do it. I love a raspberry, especially in some yogurt or in
Sign me
oatmeal.
up.
Oatmeal also has fiber in it though. So like so many people don't know what foods have fiber in them. And then I saw a post just yesterday, misinformation about fiber. And it was comparing two different foods. And it was saying this food has fiber or this is fiber. I don't know why that phrasing was chosen. This is fiber. This is not fiber. Meanwhile, the pictures are something like celery and raspberries. Both of those things
The
have
most
fiber in
fibrous
them.
of fibers.
Right. Celery is basically all fibrous. But for some reason, people don't, and then they accept that as truth, and it drives me insane because misinformation spreads so quickly, especially about health and nutrition. I
Well,
mean,
the
all of
focus
these
is all
wellness
fat, carbs,
things.
and protein, right? Like, no one, you were
Right.
taught fibers like old people food. You eat Activia yogurt when you're decrepit.
Right.
Like, no one,
It's your fiber one
yeah,
little cereal box.
go have your raisin
Right.
bran.
But like meeting vegetable goals. I mean, a couple servings of vegetables, but also that has to do with the fact that, for example, our friends in the current administration have changed the food pyramid yet again, claiming that the original food pyramid was flawed, but we
Oh,
haven't used the food pyramid in years. It used to be, prior to this food pyramid, called My Plate. And it was a cute little circular plate that showed you which portions of your plate should be filled with a protein, a fruit, a vegetable, and a grain. And they recommend whole grains, like, whole wheat bread or brown rice. But no one knew about it. And
Mm-hmm.
why did no one know about it? Because we don't teach people about it.
Right.
And so then we expect people to just find this information on their own. And that's part of the reason that misinformation is so rampant, because there's so much out there and we live in the age of information. All of this is all available to people. But for some reason, these grifters online just love to spread all sorts of,
and everyone
just
falls for it. This is the conversation that I love, and our time is unfortunately drawing to a close, and I'm like, man, let's turn this into a 2-hour episode. We gotta have you back, dude. But just really quickly, like, my personal pet peeve is in the marketing of it, right? Like, they sell it to you as a vlog, like, walk with me as I go to the coffee shop and get my favorite detox tea. And then in the captions, they're selling you some weight loss drops that have nothing to do with what they're drinking. They're selling you some, like, mind mushroom that has no... nootropics is a different... There is some that works, some that doesn't, eating shiitake mushrooms is not changing your brain chemistry, and it's not going to make you drop 50 pounds. But there's just, the marketing that goes into these scams, right? Like, how many people do we collaboratively not know that fell for these pyramid schemes with the weight loss drops just on Facebook alone?
Oh my gosh. Right. And the other problem is the strategic way that these people present this information as like a what I eat in a day. And then they will pair the information. I start my day with this glass of lemon water because this helps to detox, and they present it as if it's a fact. And then you fall for it because you're like, oh, they're talking like they know what they're talking about. And, the other thing that I hate is the like processed foods. I don't eat any processed foods, but you see these influencers that are drinking these drinks that are ultra processed. Not that processing is bad, but you're wrong. You're just
Dude,
wrong.
your water is processed.
Everything, almost everything, unless you're picking it off the tree yourself, is processed. And there's nothing
And even
wrong
then,
with it.
there's
But like
crossbreeding with GMO fruits and natural organic heirloom fruits.
Right. But it's the way that this information is presented, and then the before and after pictures. Oh, here's what I looked like before I took these weight loss drops, and here's the after, and look how flat my tummy is. Girl, I just know you're pulling a stomach vacuum. I fully know that you're just sucking in your gut. Don't lie to me. Don't lie to me.
Right, exactly. Man, and, it also comes down to the fact that the placebo effect is unfortunately very real, right? Like, my dad always likes to say, your brain doesn't have a sense of humor. You tell yourself you're sick, you're sick. That's true. That's called, it's got a name. It's the what's her name? The Gypsy Rose chick, I think.
Oh,
what is the thing called, like, where you, like, believe
Munchausen's?
That one.
Munchausen's. Yes, she had Munchausen's by proxy. Her mom had, Munchausen's by proxy. But yeah,
so, like, it escalates to that point. You can convince yourself that there's something wrong with you to that extent, and then you start making choices that mimic that lifestyle. And so,
I mean, manifestation is so real. You can manifest yourself into any state of being. I fully believe that.
Yeah.
And especially with things like the placebo of those little, like, greens powders or something. I'm not talking greens powders because they're great for micronutrients, but those green powders are not going to make you lose 50 pounds. They're just not.
It's just that you drink a gallon of water.
Right. You're drinking water and you're getting your micronutrients. But you can do that with food. You do not have to buy some very expensive supplement. Another supplement that drives me crazy, creatine. These creatine gummies for women. Creatine for women and creatine for men is exactly the same thing. Creatine monohydrate. Why are we marketing it specifically to women? Because it won't bloat you. Creatine in general doesn't bloat you if you drink enough water.
Interesting. Man, creatine is... I'm taking mental notes. There's so much we need to pick back up.
Oh my gosh, yes. Creatine is the single most studied supplement on the market. It has so much research backing it too. That's a whole can of worms. But yeah, the marketing, and again, I keep saying it, but marketing, especially at women, because women are expected to maintain these, you see it in Hollywood right now. They're really thin. They're really thin, they're really emaciated. And,
Heroin chic is
I
back
think
in, dude.
it's back, and honestly, I feel like it's worse. But now you have these peptides, and peptides are the next new thing. GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic are peptides.
Yeah.
And so these things are being marketed, and they're readily available to the general population who do not know how to use them.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that a lot of times we see this marketing online, and we're convinced because that person looks a certain way that you can look that way if you take that supplement or whatever it is. So, yeah, it's a really tricky environment to navigate, especially when you don't know how to read research papers
Yeah.
and really understand it. Like, it's hard, it's a skill, and it's not taught. So,
You're right.
it's really difficult. Yeah,
but that's why we
especially
have
for
people like
younger
Dr. Jazmine in the house.
here to debunk all sorts of things. Yeah, we're gonna have to do another one of these because we can yap forever
I think so. I
about
think
all
next
sorts of
episode is going to be about the supplements. It's going to be about GLP-1s. It's going to be about, like, what can you do? We've talked about the cards that you have been dealt by the world. Now here's an episode about the control that you can take in your life and the choices you could make.
Exactly.
Especially because that's true. Marketing is different for women and for men because it's more expensive for women.
Oh, yeah. Pink tax.
Pink tax is real.
Mm-hmm.
But, yes. Long story short, do your reading, do your research. If you are in a position to do so, champion for them adding gardening and nutrition from childhood and onwards. Whatever it is, whatever it takes. And stay tuned for a new episode that we have just agreed to here and now. Handshake deal with Dr. Jazmine Eccles-Miller.
As many as you want.
Please and thank you. As our time draws to a close, please let us know if you have any final closing remarks, statements, ultimate pet peeves, and or shout-outs.
Ultimate pet peeve. People not being able to realize when something is misinformation and sharing it without fact-checking it. Ultimate pet peeve.
Amen to that.
That's my ultimate pet peeve. My lasting advice is if you question something, Dr. Google is very helpful, but read a couple of sources. Don't just stick with one. And don't stick with Google AI. Don't listen to Google AI.
Treat Google like the guy sitting beside you on the bus. You can ask him a question and maybe he knows, but all he's doing is telling you what he's heard.
Exactly.
And that goes for all AI.
All AI.
All right, Jazmine. Well, thank you so very much for speaking with us today. Let's close out with one final song from you. What are we listening to as we wind down for the night?
I think this one is Feed the Fire by Rustage. It's another anime-inspired song. Dr. Stone, if anybody in the chat watches Dr. Stone, this is a song that's inspired by science and learning new information and really feeding the fire that, knowledge can seed in you.
Outstanding. So we'll close out on that for Podcast with a K. I'm Carla with a K signing off. I now return you to WECS 90.1 FM, Twitch, YouTube, Spotify, whatever it is that you're listening to. Have a fantastic rest of your day and a fantastic week. We'll be back next time with new nonsense and maybe a new guest, but most likely Jazmine for a part 2.
Hey. I'll return.
Well, in that case, good night, sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite, and if you bite a bed bug, you're weird. Without further ado, here is Feed the Fire by Rustage and Nina Hope. And that's a wrap. Everyone give it up for Dr. Jazmine while we listen to our sign-off song here. Yes, yes, amazing. Thank you so much, Jazmine. That's a wrap.
Hey, yeah.